When she finished, a silence so profound settled over the room that one could hear the ash settling in the hearth. Eric rose slowly and walked toward her. He stopped, so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. In the gloom, his silhouette eclipsed all light, and for a moment, Martha felt a flicker of fear, not of his anger, but of the raw power of the emotions awakening within him. He reached out, his fingers hovering just an inch from her cheek. She saw the struggle within him, his pride colliding with the realization of a monstrous mistake. In his eyes, the ice began to fracture, revealing a raw, unbearable ache beneath. He did not touch her, but that unmade contact was more intimate than any kiss. The air between them turned hot, almost searing, and in that space at the edge of the world, the old lies finally burned away, leaving behind nothing but a pure, primal attraction. The storm did not subside. It merely traded its fury for a monotonous, heavy siege. Eric stepped away from Martha and moved to a small escritoire, fishing out a crumpled pack of cigarettes he kept only for nights like this. Martha asked about Christina, a short question that hung in the air, like a heavy lead weight. Eric chuckled, and there was more exhaustion in the sound than malice. He explained that their marriage was nothing more than a stage set that suited them both. Christina had her status and the bank accounts he diligently filled, and in return, he had earned the right to solitude here among the cliffs, where no one demanded smiles or words of love. She never came to Iceland. To her, the island was a frozen hell, while to him, it had become the only place where the silence did not feel like a lie. Martha realized then that all these years, he hadn't just been living apart, he had been punishing himself with this exile, believing he deserved nothing but the cold and the salt. The words about Christina finally shattered the last remains of awkwardness. There was no longer a third party in the room, only two people who had once been everything to one another. Eric walked to the hearth and tossed a few logs of ocean-bleached driftwood into the fire. The flames flared with renewed strength, illuminating his face. He confessed that every morning, as he watched the churning ocean, he saw her face in the foam of the waves, and that vision was his personal curse. He had hated her for her betrayal, but he hated himself even more for never being able to purge her from his blood. Now that the truth was laid bare, the hatred accumulated over 10 years began to transform rapidly into something else, a hunger that could no longer be concealed. His gaze grew heavy. He no longer hid the desire that pulsed in time with the waves crashing against the cliff. Martha stood up, her shadow flickering against the wall. She stepped toward him until the toes of her borrowed boots brushed against his heavy ones. In the cramped intimacy of the lighthouse, amid the scent of smoke and the rising heat of the fireplace, social conventions ceased to exist. She reached out and touched the scar on his wrist, the one he had received in their youth. Her fingers were cool, but his skin was searing. This first conscious touch acted like an electric shock. Eric exhaled sharply, his palm covering her hand, pressing it against his body. He looked down at her with a tenderness so fierce it made Martha's head spin. In this gesture lay everything: the bitterness of a lost decade and the promise that this night would be their redemption. The walls of the lighthouse seemed to close in, leaving room for no one but the two of them. The tension that had accumulated over long years finally reached its zenith, but now its very nature had shifted. Eric took a step toward her, a movement as profound as the shifting of tectonic plates. He did not touch her immediately, but Martha felt the space between them thicken, becoming hot and visceral, like molten wax. His breath, ragged and heavy, brushed against her temple, and the scent of salt and fire-warmed wood enveloped her, stripping away her will to resist. In the flickering light of the hearth, his silhouette appeared monumental, when his hand, large, calloused, and accustomed to rough labor, finally came to rest upon her neck. Martha felt a jolt of searing recognition surge through her body. It was the touch of a man who had found a treasure he believed was lost forever. He slowly traced the line of her jaw with his thumb, compelling her to lift her head and meet his gaze. There was no more ice in his eyes, only a bottomless, dark tenderness and a silent question, to which she responded by leaning forward ever so slightly. Their closeness in this moment was devoid of haste. It was like the slow dance of shadows upon the stone walls of the lighthouse. Eric gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and that simple movement in the silence of the room resonated louder than any confession. The flannel shirt, too broad in the shoulders, rustled softly as he drew her to him, closing the final millimeters that separated their two worlds. Martha pressed her cheek against his chest, listening to the hollow, powerful thud of his heart, which echoed the rhythm of the ocean surf outside the window. They sank onto a wide armchair, draped in heavy furs, remaining within the golden circle of light from the dying embers. The entire scene was built on contrasts. The softness of her skin beneath his rough fingers, the fragility of her silhouette within the ring of his powerful arms. The moments focused on micro-movements, the way their fingers interlaced, how his lips barely grazed her forehead and closed eyelids, and how she caught her breath with every exhale he made. This was passion translated into the language of gestures and tactile sensations. In every movement, there was a sense of redemption for the years of separation. Outside the lighthouse walls, the elements raged, but here, in this cocoon of warmth and truth, time slowed down, turning their embrace into a quiet harbor where two broken hearts finally began to beat in unison, healing one another without a single word. The flames on the hearth had collapsed into a heap of shimmering embers, veiled by a thin layer of gray ash. The silence that had descended upon the lighthouse after the storm was almost tactile outside the walls. The ocean had traded its furious roar for a weary, rhythmic murmur. In the pre-dawn twilight, the room filled with a cold, bluish light that fell softly upon the heavy folds of the blankets and the interlaced hands of the two figures. Martha lay still, feeling the steady, deep rise and fall of Eric's breath. His palm still rested on her shoulder, as if even in sleep he was guarding her presence, fearing that the dawn might prove to be nothing more than another mirage. In this hour, before the world outside had regained its sharp edges, the past, the noisy halls, Christina's caustic laughter, and the years spent in the concrete jungle seemed distant and unreal, like the stage sets of a movie watched long ago. Eric opened his eyes suddenly, with the alertness of someone whose life has depended for years on the fickle moods of the elements. He did not pull away. Instead, he drew Martha closer, searching her face in the gloom. In his gaze, now stripped of its protective armor of severity, lay a quiet wonder. He slowly traced the tips of his fingers along her arm, as if testing whether the skin beneath his touch was truly so warm and alive. This night had done more than just return them to one another. It had erased a decade of distance, reducing it to nothing. He understood that beyond the threshold of the lighthouse, the real world awaited them with its complex decisions and legal entanglements. But here and now, in this stone cocoon at the edge of the earth, only one truth existed. They were no longer alone in their exile. Martha turned toward him, and in the morning dusk, her eyes looked like dark lakes brimming with hope. She asked no questions about the future, for the answer was written in every one of Eric's movements, in the tender way he touched her hair. Outside, the dawn began to stain the horizon with soft pink and golden hues, piercing through the remnants of the fog. This light was mercilessly honest. It laid bare the fine lines around his eyes and the paleness of her face. Yet, in this nakedness of emotion, there was an authentic beauty that no silks or gold could ever replace. Eric brushed her forehead with a brief, almost weightless kiss that became a silent vow. They lay in silence, listening to the island wake up, as the ash in the fireplace finally cooled, giving way to a new day that promised to be the first of their new, shared life. Morning had fully asserted its rights by the time they stepped out onto the lighthouse's narrow terrace. The air was bitingly cold, and so translucent that it felt as though one could see the very edge of the world. Below, the black sand of the beach lay perfectly smooth after the storm, gleaming like obsidian beneath a thin veil of water. The ocean, which only recently had tried to crush the cliffs, now humbly licked the shore, leaving behind laces of white foam and tangled ribbons of kelp. Eric stood by the railing, baring his face to the sharp northern wind. He was back in his coarse wool sweater, looking like an inseparable part of this landscape. Martha followed, wrapping herself in his jacket, which smelled of tobacco and freedom. She gazed at this wild, primordial land and, for the first time in her life, felt that she was exactly where she belonged. They began their descent down the steep, winding path leading to the foot of the cliff. Every step on the damp earth and moss required effort, but Eric led the way, always ready to offer a shoulder or reach out a hand. When they reached the black beach, the silence here proved to be of a different kind, filled with the powerful roar of the surf. They walked along the tide line, past twisted driftwood and shards of blue ice cast ashore by the storm. These icy monoliths sparkled in the sun like massive, uncut diamonds. The walk felt like a ritual of catharsis. Icy spray stung their skin, and the wind swept the last remnants of doubt from their minds. Martha picked up a smooth black stone from the sand, polished by millennia, and felt its weight as substantial and real as their feelings. Eric stopped at the water's very edge and turned to her. He spoke of how life here would not be easy. Iceland does not forgive weakness, and his past still trailed behind him like a long shadow. But looking into his eyes, Martha saw no fear, only a readiness to meet any challenge. She stepped close, and they stood motionless against the backdrop of an infinite horizon where the leaden sky merged with the ocean. In this place, stripped of urban clamor and the whispers of others, everything had become profoundly simple. The truth she had carried with her across half the world had finally found its soil. She knew that their story was only beginning. It was no longer a fairy tale of love, but a saga of two people who had proven stronger than their own fate. The idyll of the lull was shattered on the third day, when the sky over the coast became unnaturally clear and the ocean settled into a mirror-like stillness. The sound of a foreign engine sliced through the coastal silence suddenly and sharply, like the screech of metal on glass. At that moment, Martha and Eric were on a small pier, helping each other secure the rigging on an old boat. When a white SUV appeared on the crest of the hill, Eric froze, his face instantly transforming into the stone mask Martha had seen the night of their first reunion. The vehicle came to a halt, and Christina stepped out. She looked absurd in her pristine white fur coat and high-heeled boots, which immediately began to sink into the soft black sand. Her presence here felt like a toxic stain on the clean canvas of the Icelandic landscape.